Indigenous peoples and communities conducted the first trade-based economies across North America, beginning thousands of years ago. The Indigenous economy has always been based on equitable relationships between people and place and acts of mutual reciprocity. Sadly, much of this has changed since colonization. Can you give some background on how trade in Southern Ontario was conducted prior to European arrival, and how did that arrival impact Indigenous communities after the 1600s?
Well, absolutely. So my name is Rye Barberstock and I come from Tyendinaga. Kenhteke is on the bay. So that's really relevant to this conversation. And absolutely, my work and research in the dish with one spoon economy of the past has really demonstrated some incredible findings about Indigenous economy in North America before 1600. There's a couple economic perspectives to consider when thinking about Indigenous economic history. The first is our economy was based on a subsistence diet. Over time, this diet blossomed into a well-defined trade network system. And it provided the foods and goods regionally and to an extent internationally. Our concepts of value, wealth, and prosperity were aligned with Earth law, meaning we recognized and acknowledged the art of reciprocity, only taking what was needed to sustain life of individual and community. The third is our economy was forward-thinking, always ensuring that what was hunted, harvested, or gathered would remain a practice that future generations would also be able to conduct without limitation. So the economy of my ancestors' past demonstrates a highly complex network system built on sophisticated values and wealth generation approaches and economic processes that were cutting-edge innovations of that time and place. We had supply and demand. We knew where and when to harvest. We developed our highways and byways, both on land and water, to get our goods to local trade centers, or what we would call markets today. We had concepts of entrepreneurship and business development building upon nature's lead. We found ways to harness the power of nature and create presence to provide goods and services for people and communities. We understood the economic landscape and created economic democracy and principles to protect and preserve these economic landscapes. The dish with one spoon is a prime example, as its original intent was to share natural resources and prevented greed to occur. So economic power in the dish with one spoon territory was based on the foods that sustain people. Considering there was over 300 species, which represent a diverse food industry, it's not far-fetched to say that in Southern Ontario alone, 600 years ago, my ancestors were developing land and water-based economies that were large in scope and scale, producing what in today's Western market and value systems would equate to potentially billions of dollars in different industries. So it's really interesting because when we really kind of put an emphasis and focus on the history of our people and ways of knowing and being associated to economy, there are so many aspects that Canadians could actually learn from and grow from as well in that knowledge. So it's, how would you explain? Really, Canadians and anyone who are not familiar with Indigenous economy can learn so much about how to create opportunity without damage the integrity of the environment in the process. My ancestors did this for thousands of years and still hold true to their ancestral knowledge systems. And lastly, I think of the dish with one spoon as an agreement made between humans and non-humans for the express rights and privileges to sustain their lives in perpetuity on lands which represent and protect these ways of knowing and being. In its own right, you can look at the dish with one spoon as one of North America's free trade zones that has its roots in Eastern Great Lakes, but extends clear across Turtle Island. This was our free trade economy, our way and continued way of economic development. When colonization came into the original lands of the dish with one spoon, which basically the treaty territory went from the town of Gananoque in the Eastern Ontario and was along Lake Ontario's north, so Southern Ontario region. When we started seeing the colonizers or the colonization period coming in, we were trying to explain to them, to demonstrate to them this way of economy, this way of knowing and being is being the right way, because it was a self-sustaining approach to economy. But unfortunately, that didn't occur. And we got pretty much silenced by the Europeans, and we had to make way for them. It's also very ironic that during that whole time prior to colonization, there was peace. There was sustained peace on the land. It was only until we started having, what would be the word, competition by Europeans for our furs and for other kinds of commodities that we were developing. That's when we started seeing wars occur in our communities and in our territory. But what's really interesting is that the dish with one spoon economic treaty is very much a peace treaty that has always remained in existence and continues to remain in existence today. It's really taking the time to kind of dig deep into the history to understand and to respect that treaty, because it impacts everybody today, just as it has impacted everyone thousands of years ago. So I think that's one of the things, and one of the biggest takeaways from this part of the conversation is, understand the treaties of Indigenous peoples, because they do have an inherent and intrinsic part of every Canadian moving forward. And the more we understand the economies of our past, the more we can learn and actually build from them in a way that's going to be representative of the true essence of taking care of the land, taking care of the water, taking care of our resources, so that future generations will also be able to share in that bounty and that way of knowing and being.
I think that's great, Ryan, and I fully agree with you. I think it's looking at not only the past and understanding the treaty obligations, but really understanding how we collectively need to be able to work together, trade together, live together, in order to really move forward.